For competing stereotypes, we can consult some more literature to take a look at more details of how competing stereotypes affect our judgments. And in this example that I want to show here, participants were asked to view a video of an Asian American woman. Either this woman was pictured as putting on lipstick, so that the category of her being a woman, being female, was made more salient. Or she was pictured eating with chopsticks, so that the Asian category became more salient. Or there was a control video, a control condition where there was no specific video. And here the dependent variable in the study was the stereotype activation and inhibition. And this was measured with a word activation and inhibition task and a lexical decision task. So this study is basically a first example for how stereotypes come to mind if you have no other information in the control condition. So our task, the decision task, included 16 non-words and 16 words. And here the interesting dependent variable is how fast participants were in responding to the words. So this is a reaction time study. Among the 16 words were 4 stereotypical female traits, such as thoughtful, friendly, emotional, and romantic. And among the 4 stereotypical Asian traits were trustworthy, calm, considerate, and gracious. And our hypothesis would be that there would be faster reaction times, indicating more activation of a specific stereotype, and slower reaction times indicating more inhibition. So participants were presented with a screen like this, and they were asked to say, okay, as fast as you can, decide if the stuff that we're going to show you is a word. Yes versus no, press the button. And then the word would be shown, and participants would be asked to respond. Is this a word, yes or no? And again. And again. And this is what the data looks like for the study. So what do we have here? We have exactly the decision latency or response time for words that were stereotypically associated with being female or being Asian. Being female, these words are colored here in blue. Being Asian, these words are colored here in red. And we have the 3 conditions that I originally talked about. So the condition where the person was shown to put on makeup, the condition where the person was shown to eat with chopsticks, and the control condition. So what was our idea? If there are faster reaction times, this means activation of the stereotype. If there's slower reaction times to specific words, this means that this stereotype is being inhibited. So for the makeup condition, we can see faster reaction times to stereotypically female words or words related to stereotypic women. Faster reaction times for these stereotypically female words, and slower reaction times for the stereotypical Asian words. So we would think that the Asian stereotype in the makeup condition, where the female category became more prominent, more salient, there the Asian stereotypes were inhibited compared to the female stereotypes, which were sort of activated. And we see the exact opposite pattern in the chopsticks condition. That's in the middle 2 bars. So there we see that the female stereotypes got the longer response times, therefore was inhibited, but the Asian words got faster response times and therefore were activated. And lastly, why do we even need a control condition here? Well, we need to find out if the female and Asian words were basically similarly difficult to process in the first place. And if that is the case, then we shouldn't see differences between female and Asian words in the control condition. They should be equally activated or equally inhibited, and also equally easy to or difficult to process. And this data here suggests that there's no difference, or there's at least no evidence for difference in the processing of these Asian versus female words in the control condition where there was no specific activation of a stereotype. stereotype activation and application have some controlled and some automatic aspects. And we might also say that there's some selective activation and inhibition going on. Now, I want to play this over to you and ask you to think about whether we can control stereotype-laden thoughts. And I'd like to do this by way of a small demonstration example. So if you want to play along, this is the time to do it. What I'd like you to do is to take 2 minutes of time, grab a sheet of paper and a pen, and make some notes to describe a day in the life of this dog. And while you do that, don't use stereotypes. So pause the video now and write down a description of the day, a day in the life of this puppy. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for doing this task. And now I'd like you to do it again and describe a day in the life of this puppy. Take a moment to pause and make your description. Okay, so this procedure is adapted from an experiment that showed that in the second round, what we should see is a rebound effect. Right? Because in the first round, I asked you to specifically don't talk about stereotypes that apply to dogs that, bulldogs tend to be stereotyped negatively. And certainly this puppy might be too, because big cheeks and also sharp teeth. So in the first round, I asked you to avoid using stereotypes about dogs that might be, for instance, stereotyped as being dangerous. And in the second round, I didn't ask you to avoid stereotypes. So what we might see is that because you put in so much effort to abstain from stereotyping in the first round, you might rebound and actually stereotype even harder in the second round. So you can take a moment to pause and compare your notes for the first and the second round and see how that went for you, whether you actually rebounded and used more stereotypes in the second round. Now let me show you what the original experiment that used this procedure, of course not with puppies, but I like dogs, so that's why you now had to do this with dogs, what the original experiment actually looked like. So here's the design. Participants in phase 1 were asked to describe a day in the life of a target, and they were shown a picture of a skinhead. And they were then either instructed to suppress their stereotypes about skinheads, or there were no specific instructions. So there are 2 conditions here. Differently from what I just did, I put you all in the same condition, in the suppress the stereotype condition. And then in phase 2, they were asked to describe a day in the life of a second target person, another skinhead, and there was only the no instruction condition. So there were none of the participants were told to suppress stereotypes. And then the dependent variable was how stereotypical the passages that participants had produced were on things like violence, racism, anti-Semitism, and other stereotypically associated attributes with skinheads. So the data for this experiment looks like this. So we have rated stereotypicality on the y-axis, and then we can compare the first passage, the first writing, with the second writing. Okay, so in the first passage, we remember some participants were told to suppress stereotypes, and you can see that's the blue bar. There we have the lowest degree of stereotypicality of the content. So it actually worked. Participants were able to suppress using stereotypes compared to the red no suppress condition. Now, what happens though in the second round, the second passage? So in the second passage, we can see actually that the people who in round 1 were asked to suppress the stereotype rebounded So now the stereotypicality of the passage they wrote there in round 2 was actually higher than the stereotypicality of the passages written by people who were never asked to suppress. So I'm not sure if this difference it might be significant because there are no error bars here, but you can definitely see that the level between for the blue bars between stage 1 and stage 2, it jumps up. And maybe it's not even necessary to say that it surpassed the level of people who never suppressed the stereotype in the first stage, but it's still important to see that it jumps back up. So it's not like we can sustain for a long time our suppression of stereotypes when we are not actually actively trying to do it. There were some other measures involved in the study that I'm just going to anecdotally report here and not show you the data for it. So the other data in the study, or in actually follow-up studies, showed that participants would initially suppress the stereotype in round 1. Further down the road, or in like trickle-down behavior, they sat further away from the skinhead. So that's like a behavioral measure of stereotyping. And in a lexical decision task, just like the one that we've initially seen in the example, so where participants were asked to say if there were words versus non-words, here there was evidence for higher stereotype activation, so that means faster responses for stereotype consistent words, words that were consistent with the stereotypes of regarding skinheads. And this is compared to participants who had not suppressed the stereotype. So this would be evidence that effortful inhibition may lead to more stereotyping in another setting when we've let down our guards.